You're listening to In Good Health, the trusted news source for medicine, science, and technology. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.
I'm Mayan Vasta Betancourt.
And I'm Greg Johnson. This week, the truth about having PCOS.
I've had people tell me when I got diagnosed, I was told I wasn't going to be a mom. That is horrible. That is absolutely not true.
But first, there's not enough research to know the impact melanin has on a drug's safety and efficacy.
You have this extreme diversity of skin tones that really differentiates human populations. All these variables need to be part of the equation to truly get to treat people in individual ways.
All that and more this week on In Good Health. Most medications undergo years of development and safety testing before ever being given to humans. And once they're approved to move into human research, the drugs are still being observed for how well they work and any side effects they may cause. This practice helps ensure that we're receiving the best possible product, which when taken appropriately won't cause us harm. This model has seemed to work well, but Sophie Zeyer says that most of this research is overlooking one major variable: skin color.
You have this extreme diversity of skin tones that really differentiates human populations. I all of a sudden realized, what do we know about skin pigmentation in relationship to drug testing and to the interaction with drugs? This is where we started identifying, hey, first of all, there's very little information about this. So there's very little research started already in the 70s, 80s. But then you see over time that it's very sparsely investigated.
Zeyer is a molecular biologist and consultant for diversity, equity, and inclusion in research and development, as well as clinical trials. After the connection between melanin and drug safety was first realized over 40 years ago, people mostly forgot about it. The understanding of how our bodies metabolize drugs was never impacted, a mistake that's putting countless lives at risk. In general, after a drug enters the bloodstream, it's usually processed by enzymes, which reduces its effectiveness. But this conversion is taken into account during the research process. However, Simon Groen says that the amount of melanin a person has can create even more change, which is almost never considered.
Melanin can kind of act as a sponge in the skin to take away even more drug from the bloodstream. So depending on those enzymes in the liver and the melanin in the skin, together they kind of determine how much drug is becoming available to actually reach its intended target. So this is very dependent on the type of drug, but for some drugs, melanin can have a very important effect in changing the availability of the drug for reaching the target.
Groen is an assistant professor of evolutionary systems biology at the University of California at Riverside. The fact that melanin attracts drugs isn't the only issue. After they bind together, the melanin slowly releases it back into the body.
So let's say drugs are going to the skin and bind to melanin, then that diminishes the availability in the short term of that drug. But then over the longer term, if that drug is then being released by the melanin, then you might have a more prolonged action of that drug.
So they have these time course experiments where they looked in an animal model. They show that there is more attraction to these melanin-rich regions in the body, which includes the skin, the eyes, and also hair. And then they see this slower release of the compound in the bloodstream over periods of time. But I think much more research is needed to really carefully mimic and study this, how this actually works.
Researchers have been using this phenomenon to their advantage when creating eye medications, and it could make treating skin conditions more effective. But the dangerous downside to this process has been underestimated. The first concern is that at a research level, this effect could mess with the dosing studies. It could appear that the drug is inconsistent when in reality, it's a difference in how much of that drug is available for the body to use. Down the road, this can lead to doctors under or over prescribing medications to people with pigmented skin. But the second question is, if the melanin slowly releases the drug back into the body, when do you give a second dose?
So the timing of the dosing is important as well, because that's then, that also shifts over time because you get this absorption and release, slow release. So it's timing of the dosage and the dosage itself for the treatment of the intended target.
In an effort to rectify this oversight, Congress recently amended the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to require diversity action plans for certain clinical trials of drugs, medical devices, and biological products. This means that the research sponsors will have to set diversity goals for their participants based on sex, race, ethnicity, and age.
And so they're working on that in order to get that to basically recruit more people from African descent or Asian descent or Hispanics. But there's a huge gap but in preclinical, there's no attention for it. And that is exactly what we would like to illuminate, because if you recruit the people in clinical trials, if diverse people, they need to know the safety and efficacy data from preclinical to make an informed decision. And at the moment, that cannot be given because nobody is looking at it in preclinical.
However, there are current technologies available to make this happen. It's just a matter of the industry deciding that they want to. Zaire and Groen recently published an article in the journal Human Genomics that aims to light a fire under the scientific community to finally take this information seriously. They break down why we should care and offer tangible actions researchers can do right now that will make a big difference. Zaire says these tests can even be done in a petri dish.
And so now it becomes interesting because you can test it in the laboratory to understand the relationship between drugs and pigments, to understand how this dynamic could be interrupted or change. And you can use this to make clinical decisions, what you measure and at what frequency you measure it. So it's really informative for clinical decision making to do the initial test in a petri dish.
Another innovative option is using 3D skin models. Their development has been pioneered by the beauty industry in an effort to test products more accurately while also moving away from animal testing.
So L'Oreal was a front runner. Actually, most of the real beautiful scientific papers describing the skin and pigment in the skin are done by scientists working at L'Oreal. But through that innovation, actually now companies have been formed that actually offer these 3D skin models with and without pigments for people to purchase and actually use in their own labs. And it's really a turnkey solution. So you put your order in and you get it with all the media and everything. You can start right away, which is so important because otherwise, every pharma company, let's say, would have to develop their own skin models and have to standardize it to make it reproducible, so to create reproducible results. But because these vendors now exist, creating these 3D cell models, pharma labs can adopt them right away and actually test whether their drugs has indeed affinity for melanin and start investigating indeed what the kinetics, how it affects the kinetics of the drug in the body.
Once they know these effects, they can adjust the clinical protocols and create safer, more effective products for people with higher levels of melanin in their skin. However, Zaire notes that accounting for melanin is just the first step. When doing this research in human cells, she says that scientists really need to be reporting the ancestry of these samples.
There's a lot of genetic variants that contribute to whether a skin is pigmented or not. So we don't really understand how it genetically works. So therefore, it's super important to have genetic ancestry associated with the skin models used in the laboratories so we can understand how the drug kinetics is related. Eventually, maybe in a couple of years, understand how the drug kinetics is related to genetics and basically variants, and that we can now start to predict it in the future better.
Which will help streamline the research process. And while AI can be an incredibly useful tool in combing through all of this data, scientists need to first broaden the data points they're looking at.
I don't think we are giving sufficient variables or we're measuring sufficient variables for potential algorithms to extract how a drug works differently in a person of Northern European descent versus a person of African descent. And we need to work towards that, giving all the variables, genetics, how does a drug interact with melanin from skin models, the metabolites of the liver. All these variables need to be part of the equation to truly get to treat people in an individual way, so working towards precision medicine.
And as she mentioned earlier, Zaire believes that the action that can have the most immediate impact is fairly simple. Scientists need to start documenting the specific ancestry of the cells used in research.
If you use the cell of Northern European descent, report it. That's now not happening. If you use a cell of Northern African descent, and we want to be as specific as possible, report it. And so, because once we start reporting, we have data, we have this information we can use to start seeing patterns. We can start using that in algorithms that we are using increasingly. But at the moment, in terms of diversity and acknowledging that there's different human populations, there's not enough reporting in the earlier stages and later on clinical trials either. And once we start reporting, we can start to see patterns.
While this type of detailed reporting is part of the scientific process, Zaire says that for some reason it's been ignored when it comes to human diversity. Both Zaire and Groen hope their advocacy reaches the patients and helps them realize the questions they should be asking.
For example, when they are considered for participation in a clinical trial, they could ask the doctors like, hey, before you give me this new drug that is in development, has this been tested on cell models that are representative for my ancestry? So right now, if people are of like European descent, then in most cases, the answer is yes, it's been tested on cell models from European descent. But for people originally from like sub-Saharan African descent, then it's often the case that such drugs have not yet been tested preclinically on cell models that also have origins in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's something that people should, I think, really ask their doctors, like, hey, is this experimental drug like really safe for people of my ancestry?
Groen believes that having more people ask these questions will convince the pharmaceutical companies to start considering this diversity in their preclinical research. And at the very least, it gives the patients better information to decide if they're willing to accept the potential risks of the drugs they're taking. You can find more information about all of our guests on our website, ingoodhealthpodcast.org. For more behind the scenes, follow In Good Health Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.
Coming up, everything you need to know about PCOS when In Good Health returns. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is a hormonal condition that affects at least 1 in 10 women. It appears when the body has an imbalance of reproductive hormones. But since this issue can cause a whole range of symptoms, Dr. Laura Shaheen says it's often underdiagnosed.
It is not a black and white diagnosis. It's a collection of signs and symptoms. It often presents with irregular and unpredictable menstrual cycles due to irregular and unpredictable ovulation. And that's a part of the hormone imbalance. 2 other things that are often associated with it are clinical or laboratory findings of elevated androgens or male hormones. We all have both female and male hormones, but in PCOS, it's a little bit balanced towards the androgens or the male hormones,
which can cause acne, thick hairs on the mustache and chin areas, and even male pattern baldness. Shaheen is a double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist at Pacific Northwest Fertility. Another sign of PCOS is a higher than average egg supply.
So you can look at the ovaries on ultrasound and see all of these little follicles, kind of more than you would expect for someone at a certain age, or an elevated blood test called anti-Müllerian hormone, or AMH, kind of above average for what you'd expect.
Most women are born with all the eggs they'll ever produce, around 1 to 2 million at the time of birth, and that includes those with PCOS. The difference is that during ovulation, the typical 10 to 15 eggs available to be fertilized drastically increases for women with PCOS.
They might have 20, 30, 40, 50 follicles that are kind of up for grabs, visual. That's why their AMH is so much above average or higher. It's like all these little follicles or eggs are kind of fighting to be the one to ovulate. And that's one of the reasons that the ovulation is off, because they get kind of confused. And so if you're not ovulating on a predictable timeline, you could have really unpredictable menstrual cycles and only get a period 3 or 4 times a year.
This unpredictable pattern is part of the reason why so many people think that having PCOS causes infertility. Shaheen says that while it doesn't cause infertility, it can make conceiving more difficult because ovulation may only happen a few times a year.
It's difficult to time trying to get pregnant if you aren't actually sure when you're ovulating. And I just really want to clarify that so many people are told within the same sentence of getting the diagnosis, like when they're teenagers or in their 20s, you have PCOS, you are going to be infertile. And I just wish there was more education at that point or kind of understanding that it could impact fertility. But as long as you can ovulate, there's sort of simple things that we can help as far as a fertility doctor or reproductive endocrinologist to help people ovulate on time. If you're just ovulating regularly, you still have a very high chance of getting pregnant. It doesn't have to be just awful sort of, I've had people tell me, oh my gosh, when I got diagnosed, I was told I wasn't going to be a mom. That is horrible. That is absolutely not true.
It just means that the journey may take some more time and resources in order to figure out how your specific body works. Shaheen says that before turning to medications, which are helpful options, she tries to help her patients optimize their life for health.
You can learn your body and learn how nutrition can help you and how moving your body can help you, and then get the signal of more regular ovulation, because PCOS has long-term health impacts like increased risk of cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, diabetes. So there's really great kind of positive things to share. Like you can move your body 3 or 4 times a week with pretty low impact, kind of 30, 40 minutes. And without using exercise to say like, oh, you need to lose weight to, be healthy with PCOS, just moving your body without a change in a scale, like a number on a scale, that can help people start ovulating.
Movement helps reduce insulin resistance and allows the hormones to communicate more effectively. And in line with most other health tips, eating whole foods and limiting consumption of ultra-processed foods can only help. Shaheen often has her patients work with a nutritionist to find the best plan to balance their lifestyle.
It's not a quick fix, but it's sort of taking a look at all of these things to hopefully help. There are some supplements that have been shown to really help with PCOS. Inositol, which is basically like a sugar in our body, it sort of can act like an insulin sensitizer, again, to help with decreasing, this stress on the body and help insulin work better to help with ovulation. But definitely work with a provider, be careful where you're buying supplements and get the right thing. And, there's a lot of things that can be done.
Another tool that can help, but is often misunderstood, is birth control. Shaheen says these pills can mask the symptoms of PCOS since it evens out the body's hormones. However, she often sees myths online from people claiming that birth control causes PCOS.
Where that comes from is people will stop birth control pills for whatever reason, but very common in my practice is they stop it because they want to get pregnant. And then they're not getting their periods, the acne comes back, they go to the doctor, a new doctor, because this is a decade later, and the doctor diagnoses them with PCOS, doesn't explain why the birth control pills masked the symptoms. And then they'll read an Instagram post that says the birth control pills caused your PCOS, and now I'm going to sell you a supplement to, make it all better. But it's those evil birth control pills. Birth control pills are not for everyone, but they really can be so helpful in certain situations. And a lot of people with PCOS are just, their symptoms are better. They're so much happier on them. Doesn't mean that they have to take them, but just that misconception that they cause PCOS is not true.
If you're wondering how these myths can be so prominent in society, it's because there's still a lot we don't know about this condition. Shaheen says that her own medical education barely touched on PCOS. In fact, all of her knowledge comes from a personal sense of responsibility to stay up to date on the latest research. Otherwise, she'd still be treating her patients with outdated knowledge from 20 years ago, which is sadly a common practice for many physicians. These old-fashioned methods are part of the reason why PCOS goes undiagnosed in many women.
The person that was in my textbook when I learned about PCOS was a little bit overweight, had acne, and was not getting periods. And I was taught, again, this is a long time ago, that that is PCOS. So there's a lot of people that have I think of it like a spectrum. Like people will not have any difficulty losing weight, and the only way it shows up for them is irregular ovulation and maybe a high egg count, but they don't have any of the sort of androgen things that show up like acne or something like that. And other people, it can show up in so many different ways. If it's not on your radar, if you're not thinking about it, you could definitely miss it.
Shaheen dives into more of the issues surrounding PCOS and fertility on her podcast, Baby or Bust. You can find more information about this condition, Dr. Laura Shaheen, and all of our guests on our website, ingoodhealthpodcast.org. For more behind the scenes, follow In Good Health Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our lead producer is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Greg Johnson.
In Good Health returns in just a moment.
Medical notes this week: how scientists could catch schizophrenia sooner than ever before. Having an early diagnosis can significantly improve a patient's quality of life through proper management of their symptoms. Thankfully, new research published in the journal Nature Mental Health just made a huge advancement toward early detection. Scientists were able to identify certain brain structures that give insights into a person's irregular brain function. Until now, these markers have gone unnoticed. Ultra-processed foods may be raising your blood sugar levels. It's not just the extra sugar and salt, but the additives that are found in these products that can lead to higher blood glucose levels. Additionally, these foods are linked to increased rates of obesity, depression, heart disease, and early death. The research is published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. How happiness supports your brain health. New research in the Journal of Aging and Health reports that the risk of dementia is lower in people with better mental health. The 12-year study suggests that having a positive mindset can not only improve quality of life, but also lessens the burden associated with cognitive decline. And finally, are robots better doctors? New surgical robots are able to imitate skilled surgeons by watching videos of the procedures. In fact, the machines are able to predict the next correct motion and do things that they were never taught. Researchers believe this is propelling the medical field into a new era of robotic autonomy. The paper is a focus of the 2024 Conference on Robot Learning in Munich, Germany. And that's Medical Notes this week. I'm Mayan Vasta Betancourt.
Thank you for joining us this week and every week as we break down the science stories you need to know. You can find all of our past segments and guests on our website at ingoodhealthpodcast.org or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and X for more behind-the-scenes content. Tune in next week for another edition of In Good Health.